Welcome back, everybody. This is the 21 off season, looking at the Washington football team, and specifically today, the defensive line. I apologize in advance if I call them by their former name. That may happen to me at some point, so I apologize ahead of time. That is not intentional. I want to say a word about the defense overall before I specifically look at the defensive line today. You know, when we covered Washington last off season, we talked about in depth really how the pieces were in place for this to be a top 10, top 12 kind of a defense in 2020. And, you know, when we brought in Ron Rivera as head coach and Jack Del Rio as defensive coordinator, you knew that this would be a tough defense and that everything was there for this to be a top 10, top 12 kind of defense. What I didn't expect was for it to look this good, especially by the end of the year. And when you add up all the numbers for the season, they finished basically as the number two defense overall, depending on which kind of statistics you want to look at to measure the defense. This was a top defense, and I was impressed by the energy and the flow to the football. I wasn't surprised by that. What really impressed me as you watch the defense this year, and especially in the second half of the season, was just how intelligently they played. They did not usually seem to be out of position. They reacted to the football well. They reacted to play action well. They reacted to a lot of different things well. But it was almost as if at times they were anticipating certain things, and that just shows intelligent players and good coaching. And it takes both, and Washington has both. And I think you can expect a lot of the same performance. I wouldn't necessarily predict number two statistical defense next season. That depends on injuries and who all you play. But I think you can expect a lot of the same thing for Washington in 2021. I think you can really expect this defense to be right back up there at the top. The pieces are all in place. And some of the guys we'll talk about today, like Chase Young, they do nothing but look like they can get even better than what we saw last season. So, really impressed by the defense this year. Really impressed by what Ron Rivera was able to do and Jack Del Rio was able to do, and that entire coaching staff, and then, of course, the players themselves. I don't care how much coaching you have, if you don't have at least some players at some level with some talent and some intelligence, your coaching just isn't going to make as much difference as it could if you've got these kind of players. So let's talk about the defensive line today. I've put them all together. I've just mixed them all up. So these are the edgers and the interior guys all mixed together. Position-wise, though, if you want to know, of course, it's Montez Sweat and Chase Young. They're quite a pair of defensive ends. I mean, you won't see too many defensive end bookends on the same team that compete with these two guys. And the impressive thing about Sweat and Young is that they're good not only getting to the quarterback, which you expect from Chase Young, but they're good against the run. And Chase Young looked very comfortable this season. Yeah, a couple times you would see him make a mistake. A couple times you would see him looking for help from somebody from the linebacking spot. But very comfortable from Chase Young. And both of these guys, Sweat and Young, hold up very well against the run. And they hold up very well when trying to get to the quarterback. So there's really no reason to take them off the field other than that you just don't want to wear them out. Okay, so these guys handled most of the snaps at defensive end last year. They will do the same thing again this year, barring injury. These guys are exceptional. And in Young's case, I think you will only see him get better, especially at getting to the quarterback. The defensive tackles, the guys who will carry most of the load and did carry most of the load, Deron Payne, Jonathan Allen, good defensive tackles. These aren't world beaters. They're not, the kind of guys who are going to compete for all pro for the most part, but good, solid defensive tackles, especially when they're flanked by edge rushers like Sweat and Young. Makes guys like this, Payne and Allen, who are already decent and solid guys, makes them even better. So it really opens up the door. It's kind of hard for the offensive line to decide who to double team, who to chip, if anybody, because these guys all hold up pretty well against the run, and they all have the ability to some degree, especially three of these guys here, to get to the quarterback. So that just really, when it's spread apart like that, it makes it incredibly difficult for the offensive line and the offensive coordinators to decide who to double team, if anybody. Those are the four main guys. Those are your four headline starters, the guys who get by far the lion's share of the snaps. Ioannidis, good player. We didn't get much of him last year because he was injured, so he really was not a factor at all last year. Kerrigan, of course, got about 400 snaps last year. Same thing with Tim Settle. Kerrigan and Settle both contributed a lot this year, about 400 snaps, give or take 20 for each of them. And I think you can expect that from Tim Settle. Tim Settle, to me, right here at defensive tackle, looks like a guy who was ready to step up and get a lot more snaps. He looks like he's ready to get a lot more of the burden. And instead of getting 400 snaps, to me, he looks like, based on how he played last year, like a guy who's ready to get 600, 700 snaps even and really take the load off, just kind of keep the rotation going for these Washington defensive linemen. Smith Williams, the draft pick a season ago, 2 seasons ago, I forget, 7th rounder. We just haven't seen enough of him, but he looked decent in the 100 or so snaps that he got last year. Turnover-wise, this line is not going to change a lot. One guy I think is gone for sure, maybe 2 guys, but let's talk about the first. Let's talk about the first guy. The only free agent that you have out of these top 8 guys, the only one is Kerrigan, and he made $12 million last year, so he had a pretty hefty cap number. I'm not going to call Kerrigan's contract a bad contract, but at this point in his career, and considering what all you've got there at the top end for Washington, you're not going to be paying him $12 million next season. He's a free agent. I do not expect him to come back. I would be very shocked. Now, you never know. Washington may say, no, we want to keep you around. We really like you in the rotation. We still like, because he still holds up well against the run and getting to the quarterback. There were times this year where his moves to the quarterback were excellent. Can he still carry that load for a full season or not? I don't know. But in any case, you're just not going to pay him $12 million. Okay, that's just not going to happen. I think Kerrigan will be gone from Washington, and I fully expect some other NFL team to snap him up in a heartbeat and be fully excited about doing so if the price is right. What is the right price? You never really know. Some NFL teams are very savvy and very smart about getting the right guy for the right price, and other NFL teams, sometimes they just fall in love with the guy and just start throwing money at him. And so you never really know. It's always a little tricky to predict exactly with some of these mid-range guys, which Kerrigan is. He's probably not going to eat up 1,200 snaps next year. 1,100 snaps. He's a rotational kind of guy. You never really know what an NFL team is thinking about in free agency and who's going to fall in love with this guy. Some NFL team, though, will pick up Kerrigan and will have a valuable guy in the rotation because he still has a lot to contribute. It just won't be for Washington at this $12 million price tag. So he's the only guy that is for sure gone out of your top 8 defensive linemen. The other guy that we'll wait and see what Washington does is Matt Ioannidis. Now, Ioannidis is a kind of player I love. Love his work ethic, love his energy, love the fact that he holds up good against the run, can get to the quarterback. But he's had some injury troubles, and at this point you wonder, do we actually need him? Now, when I say that, do we need him, we don't need him for frontline talent. We've got 4 guys right there, okay? Sweat, Young, Payne, Allen. We've got 4 guys right there who on the front end, talent base, we don't necessarily need anybody else. So we're not going to miss Kerrigan or Ioannidis if we choose to let him go as far as your top end talent. Where you do miss guys like this and where they are so valuable and where the defensive line held up so well this year is on the depth end, because you know somebody's going to get injured and maybe somebody's just not going to play as well. Maybe you just want to keep guys fresh. And this is where you really miss guys like that at. So on the depth end, you're desperately going to miss Kerrigan, and you're going to miss Ioannidis if you decide to let him go. Why would I mention letting go of Ioannidis? The only reason is this. He made $7 million last year, and the dead cap hit for letting him go is only $3 million. And if he was the only guy that you really wanted to let go this year out of the entire team who had a dead cap hit that big, you could always just use the P61 cut on Ioannidis, and I think the cap hit for him this year would turn out to be like $1.5–2 million, and the following season would be $1 million, $2 million, something like that. So you could let Ioannidis go and save anywhere from $4 million to $5.5 million in this offseason if you wanted to. Would you miss him on the front end as far as your starters go, the guys who are eating up most of your snaps? No, you wouldn't. Would you miss him in depth? Yes, you would. Can you do something about that? And yes, you can. You can use more of your draft picks. You can also go back into free agency if you want to and try to get somebody for $3 or $4 million who is just a good rotational guy. And those guys are available. And this is one of the really important things, and I think I don't want to say a lot of NFL teams. Some NFL teams miss out on building their depth by getting veterans for $3 or $4 million. A lot of them are so focused on trying to get guys who are top end talent that they almost kind of forget about this. It's kind of like the leftovers are the backups and provide the depths. And those guys get a lot of playing time at some point, depending on where the injuries hit. So depth wise, if you want to let go of Ioannidis and Kerrigan, you can use a draft pick to build that depth back again. If it's a good draft pick, we're not talking fifth and sixth rounders here. We're talking a second rounder, a third rounder, or you could dip into free agency and for about $3 million, $4 million, get the same kind of rotational balance that you basically were getting out of Kerrigan and Ioannidis. So the only guy for sure, the only guy we know for sure is probably gone is Kerrigan because of this price tag, $12 million. He's a free agent. He's probably not going to get that from anybody next year. Certainly, I wouldn't think he's going to get that from Washington. And then Ioannidis is a guy who's not a free agent, but they could clip him off, releasing him, or even possibly a trade if anybody's interested in a trade. The dead cap hit on that would be about $3 million, which you could break up over 2 seasons. Okay, so that's the money. Now, you've got a good defensive line here, but you are paying for it. In 2020, you paid about $49 million for all of these guys put together. Now, nobody's ripping you off here, really. I don't want to call these bad contracts because they're not. But you are paying for what you're getting. So $47 million to be invested in one position group is quite a bit of money, especially when we're not even talking about the quarterback yet. Okay, so you can trim out $12 million and maybe even another $5 million right here. You could trim out $17 million right here. And if you could dip back into free agency for one of those guys and add a draft pick for another million, you could basically have a defensive line that looks a lot the same, maybe even a little bit younger, but for about $12 to $13 million less overall by the time you get through swapping these guys out. So that's something I would look for Washington to do if they decide they need the cap space somewhere else. And listen, you can always use the cap space somewhere else, but they have drafted so well right there at the top, especially with Sweat and Young. It allows them these options that if they want to let a guy like Ioannidis go, yes, they'll miss him on the depth chart, but you can bring other guys in for cheaper prices to contribute 300, 400, 500 snaps during the season and get a lot of the same value here. So we'll see what Washington decides to do with that. And I think that's it. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time. We'll cover a different part of the Washington football team. Have a great one. Bye.